So you want to be able to play these worship songs like The Goodness of God and Waymaker on a worship team. Maybe you just started playing keys and you're nervous and unsure where to start. Maybe you dove right in and learned how to play one song in a YouTube tutorial, but all you want is a simple, easy method that will teach you to not play just one song, but hundreds of songs, and how to sound great doing it. I'm Garrett, a worship pastor who's played keys for 13 years on large worship teams, and by the end of this video, you'll have a huge list of worship songs you'll be able to play by learning just 4 chords. Today, we're going to use the song King of My Heart as our example. I'll have the chord chart linked in the description so you can follow along. The first thing you might notice is that at the top of the chord chart, we've got the key of G. What does that mean? A key is essentially a group of notes that work together and sound good together. If you were to play something outside of the key, it would sound bad or dissonant. How do you know which notes these are? That's where scales come in. You've probably heard of scales or played scales. I remember as a kid being forced to learn scales and hating scales. The key of G means we're going to play a G scale. We would start at G, since we're in the key of G, and from one tile to another is called a half step. So if we were to move from G up to G sharp or A flat, that would be moving a tile. That would be called a half step. If we were to move 2 tiles from G to A, that is what's called a whole step. So half steps and whole steps, those are 2 terms to understand when doing scales. Starting here, we're going to move 2 tiles, which is a whole step. Then we're going to move another whole step. Then we're going to move a half step. Then we're going to move a whole step. Then we're going to move a whole step. We're going to move one more whole step. And then we're going to end on the last half step, which brings us back to our G, which is our 1. If I was to play that scale and played something outside of that scale, you hear how that sounds bad. It might give it a little jazzy sound, but that's not really what we're going for in modern worship music most of the time. So as you noticed, I numbered as I was playing through the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. A lot of times we use numbers in music, and that's sort of the foundation of music theory. So as you progress as a musician down the road, numbers will become very important. As you build scales, I would just say to yourself as you play G, 1, then I would say 2. As you play A, say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Another thing I would do while you're playing scales that will help you down the road is to start playing what's called octaves with your left hand. If we're playing a scale in G, I would put my pinky on a low G, and then I would also put my thumb on the G, which is 8 notes above where the term octave comes from. Then I would play my scale. If we were to play a scale in the key of D, I would do the same thing. D octave with my left hand, and then I would build out the scale. So you could practice all the different scales on this common chord chart if you'd like, using the pattern I just taught you. Now we'll come back to these numbers in just a little bit, but I want to touch on letters that you see in the chord chart. So when we look at our chord chart again, you notice some letters above words. You might wonder what those are. Those are just ways of signifying chord changes. When I look at G, that means a G chord. Later on there's a C, that's a C chord. How do we build those out? So to build a G chord, we're going to start at G, and we're going to put 3 tiles or 3 notes in between our next finger. There's 3 tiles in between here. Next, you're going to put 2 tiles in between the last notes. So here we go. There's a chord. And again, as you're learning chords, I would use your left hand to do octaves with whatever the chord is. G, G, and then you'll build your chord. Your G, 3 tiles, 2 tiles. There's a G. Our next note as we're going down the chord chart is C. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to start on C. I'm going to put 3 tiles in between. I'm going to put 2 tiles in between. There's our C chord. Now again, left hand, I'm going to do octave on the C's. Okay. We go back and we see another G. We already learned our G, so here we go. Next we have an E with an M on it. What does that mean? The M signifies in chord charts minor. All of our chords, unless specified, are normally major, which just means they're the normal chord configuration. So when we learn G, we've got 3 tiles, then 2 tiles. Now when we do a minor chord, that pattern flip-flops. If we were to do a chord usual, there would be 3 tiles in between and 2 tiles, but that doesn't sound good in the key. What a minor does is it brings that middle note down a half step. So instead of being this, an E minor would be this. For a minor chord, you would do 2 tiles in between now, then you would do 3 tiles. So there we go, there's our E minor. And then we have a D, back to our original pattern. D, we've got 3 tiles in between, then we got 2 tiles in between. And then we go to our C, and then we go back to our G, which we also already learned. Alright, you did it. You literally just played all of the chords that are in the song King of My Heart. So those 4 chords are carried throughout the whole song and they don't change at all. So once you've learned those chords, you can play the entire song of King of My Heart. And not only that, you literally just learned the chords for hundreds of worship songs. Now you may have heard that most worship songs just have 4 chords, or you may have heard the 1, 4, 5, and 6, and you're like, what do those numbers mean? Well, in the key of G, what we're just doing, if we look at this chart, you'll notice that our G relates to our 1, our C, which is a note in there, that would be a 4, we've got a D in there, that would be our 5, and our E would be a 6. So if we were to do the scale, you see how it lines up. 1 is our G, 2, 3, 4, there's our 4, which is C chord, there's our 5, which is a D chord, there's our 6, which is an E, and then 7 we're not using 1. So 1, 4, 5, and 6. Those are the common chords that are used in almost all pop music, country music, and modern worship music. So once you've learned those 4 chords in the key of G, for key of G songs, you're basically set. If you wanted to branch out, you could do the same exact thing in the key of C. So if we move to key of C, it's the same exact chords, the 1, 4, 5, and 6, that are going to work in the key. So now if you learn all of those, you can play in the key of C. And you can do the same thing with every single key. Pick a key and start learning it. So I would start, especially for beginners, in the key of C, because it's all of the white keys. You don't have to worry about any black keys. I would learn the 1, 4, 5, and 6, like what we just went through. Start playing them. Look up songs in the key of C until you become comfortable playing them. Then once you're comfortable playing in the key of C, I would learn the key of G. Start playing with all of those 4 chords until you feel comfortable with those. Then I would learn next the key of D. I would learn the 1, 4, 5, and 6 for the key of D. Then I would move to the key of A. Then I would move to the key of E. Normally, if you know those 5 keys, you're pretty much set for most worship music. Now here's a song list that you can get started on in the key of C. Start learning these songs in the key of C until you're comfortable, and then start learning more keys as well. Now I mentioned that learning these 4 chords get you on a worship team quickly. But once you've learned a few songs using this method, you might notice that your hand has to move a fair amount. And you might notice that it gives it a little bit of a basic sound. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to use proper hand placement so your hand doesn't have to move so far and it sounds really smooth, polished, and professional.